hold off a second here. We okay? All right. Good evening and welcome to the San Bruno City Council meeting of September 24th, 2013. And we also have following a special City Council meeting. I'd like to thank the Garden Club for the flowers they always provide for our meetings. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Salazar.
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Connell. Here. Mayor Ruane.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Ibera.
Here. And David Waltering, would you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to call the meeting to order. I've done that already, but also the special City Council meeting of September 24th today, 2013. We have some announcements. The first is that there will be a candidates forum given off by the League of Women Voters right here in the Senior Center on October 2nd, 7 o'clock. And you'll have a chance to listen to the candidates that are running for City Council, and I guess that's the only office. There will not be a City Council meeting on December 24th, the fourth Tuesday in December. The only regular City Council meeting in December will be held on December 10th, 2013. Item B, the deadline to apply for a board member position on the San Bruno Community Foundation is 5 p.m. on September 30th, 2013. And in the special City Council meeting agenda, there's one more announcement, and that's to present a proclamation expressing appreciation for the distinguished service of Arthur Jensen to both Bosqua and Bawa. And I'd like Irene to since she's our rep on Bosqua, to read that proclamation.
Thank you. After many years of service, 10 years of which were at Bosqua, Art Jensen is taking a well-deserved retirement, and we as the city would like to give him this proclamation. And I'll just read a couple of the whereas. The whereas, the city of San Bruno recognizes and honors Art Jensen's extraordinary and successful performance as its chief executive officer, general manager, and as general manager for Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Area, that's the Bosqua. Predecessor organization of the Bay Area Water Users Association, that's the BAWA, during the past 18 years. And just to give you a brief overview, it was Art Jensen and his team that led the charge, I guess, for 3 pieces of legislature that created Bosqua and the oversight that we are able to do to make sure that San Francisco PUC did the seismic upgrade for the Hetch Hetchy water system, and while it's not cheap, it will ensure that in the event of an earthquake, we will have water within 24 hours. So that was one of his crowning accomplishments. And we, members of the San Bruno City Council, hereby proclaim our appreciation for the distinguished service of Art Jensen to both Bosqua and Bawa, and for his many contributions to residents of San Bruno who depend on the availability of a reliable, high quality, and affordable water supply. So with that, I will be giving this to him on Thursday, which is his retirement party.
Good, thank you, and please give him our best. 4 presentations. There aren't any presentations this evening. 5, review of the agenda. Any changes? I think we're all right. 6, approval of the minutes of the City Council meeting of September 10th, 2013. Any errors, corrections, omissions? Seeing none, they'll be approved as submitted. Item number 7, consent calendar. All items are considered routine or implemented earlier council action and may be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion unless requested by a council member, citizen, or staff. Any action on the consent calendar?
Move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second on the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Public hearings. We don't have any public hearings this evening. We'll get right into public comment on items not on this agenda. It's the council's policy to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and interaction where appropriate. The Brown Act prohibits the council from discussing or acting upon any matter not agendized pursuant to state law. Before we call the people in the audience up, I would just want to say at a previous council meeting, an inquiry was made by a member of the public regarding delinquent accounts and utility billing write-offs. There's a memo available with the city clerk this evening explaining in detail the city's aggressive collection procedures and our strict adherence in compliance to generally accepted accounting practices. So that is available report with the city clerk this evening. So would anyone else like to address the council?
Robert Rico, 7th Avenue. On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I just want to put in a plug. On the 6th of October, on Sunday, we're going to have Legislative Day, and our mayor will be one of the people manning a booth on the Sunday the 13th. We have invited the four council people running for the four people running for the two council positions. Excuse me. And on the 20th, we have the four candidates for the school board. And I just found out this afternoon that on November 3rd, the City Public Service Department is going to have an information booth. So come out to the farmers market on Sunday. There's always something to do besides good fruit and vegetables.
And next Tuesday?
Pardon?
The Taste of San Bruno? The Taste of San Bruno, next Tuesday?
Yes. Oh, how could I forget that? The 1st of October is the Taste of San Bruno, 6 to 8 o'clock in Park and Rec upstairs. And you can go online and get tickets, or you can show up at the door, and we'll be glad to take your money. And we have, I think I saw the list this afternoon, 15 or more of the local food establishments serving their free samples. So hopefully you will be enticed to spend money in San Bruno. And there'll be some raffles and some other funny things too. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Next, please. Tell us your name and street.
Barbara Larea, Clark Ave. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Mayor, it was nice seeing you at the farmers market. A couple of things. The first is from 2008 to 2012, I have something from the city that says there was about $250,000 in write-offs for just sewer. I haven't received the water yet. So I know you said there's something available, but I'd like to be able to find if it were just residents or with their businesses involved or things like that. So I would look into that because that's a lot of money. You could hire one police officer and one firefighter. The other thing is on the water and sewer bills. I live alone. I live in an 800 square foot house. And my monthly water, sewer, and garbage rates is my second highest bill in my household. It's the second bill to my mortgage. It's higher than PG&E. PG&E is a for-profit corporation. The city of San Bruno is supposed to be a not-for-profit entity that is here to serve the citizens. So I wanted to point that out, and I have one of the lowest bills in San Bruno because I have such a small home, and I'm really good at conserving. Many people I've spoken to have told me that the sewer, water, and garbage bill is their second highest bill. I've also got water rates for Daly City and South San Francisco, and they're a lot lower than, we have one of the highest rates around. So I'm hoping you're going to do something about that. And the last thing is when we got signatures last year to stop the water, sewer, and garbage rate raise, which is for 5 years in a row. This is going into year 2. The city was warned and reprimanded because they didn't send notices out to renters, only to owners. Really, all ratepayers are supposed to get a copy of the notice. The city got reprimanded for that last year. This year, the notices went out for a garbage increase just recently. The city did the same mistake again this year. It went only to property owners. It did not go to all ratepayers. I want to make that public, and I'm hoping the city can do something about that. I'm going to watch and see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty Medina, Garden Avenue, City Council candidate. Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff, and guests. As I campaign to lower water and sewer rates for everyone in San Bruno, I keep hearing voters ask, why
is my water and sewer bill so high? Everybody in this room knows why. It's the city council. They have the ultimate responsibility to the people of San Bruno and the implementation of all programs and services. It approves all ordinances, resolutions, and major contracts, modifies and approves the budget. So clearly, the responsibility lies with the city council. I looked back at the notice I received, why we're raising water and sewer, and it's missing one thing. What most people don't know is the following from San Bruno Patch article written by Martin Ricard, dated February 25th, 2012. After months, this is quote, after months of negotiations, the city reached settlements with Baykeeper and the Water Control Board in July 2011 for $271,000 in fees and $642,167 in fines, respectively. These were charges that were not necessary, that were fully in the hands of the city council. In 1997, a cease and desist order required the city to invest $1.84 million per year for 10 years to get the sewer system up to par. However, the city only invested $1.4 million annually, nearly $500,000 short a year of what was required. Meanwhile, the sewer rates were raised. End of quote. So your rates go up because the council votes for it, and in the notice of why the rates are going up, it doesn't list that the city was paying these $900,000, which is almost the 10% increase in the sewer. So we, as the citizens, do not have a voice in this. It was the council's responsibility to comply with the cease and desist order. They didn't do it, and we wind up paying for the fines. If elected, my first order of business will be to propose to suspend the water and wastewater increases. Thank you very much for the write-off procedure. It's very clear. $600,000 that are written off in 5 years, that should be collected, and it could be applied to reduce our water and sewer rates. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, item 10, conduct of business. The first item is A, receive oral report and provide direction to staff and the Caltrain JPB regarding parking on First Avenue.
Okay, thank you and good evening. So as a follow-up from last council meeting when we went through some of the questions that the community had asked, I was asked to give just a quick update as to the status. I'm sorry.
Just introduce yourself so the
I'm sorry.
The TV audience.
I've been here so many times, I assume everyone knows me. Raphael Bolin with JPB Caltrain. So I'm giving a quick update this evening on where we are with the parking and some proposed mitigation to some of the parking losses that we've been working jointly with city staff on. So real quickly, just quick update on the parking, discuss some of the mitigation, and then just take any questions you may have. So how we got here was during the September 4th outreach meeting, there were some individuals from the community who had specific questions about parking losses, in particular about what was going to happen First Avenue in the after condition. Then provided an update to City Council, and the City Council had some of their own questions regarding that. So after that, sat down with city staff and worked through where we are on First Avenue, came up with 2 alternative mitigation strategies, but also decided to take it one more level and say, well, let's look at all the street parking and see if there's something we can do, and then just present that to the council. So what I'm going to give you right now is the as planned. So this is what the contract plans say today as far as parking. The minuses, you can't see them real well, but these are minuses, or I'm sorry, those are pluses, these are minuses. So red equals spots that will be lost from the existing condition. Green represents additional parking that is not there today. So very quickly, San Mateo, this is San Mateo up by what used to be the lumberyard, what's currently the transit center. This is San Bruno up here going up down on this street. So what we discovered at San Mateo is that there are 15 spots that are there currently that get lost, and 5 additional spots get added for a net loss of 10 parking spots on San Mateo. The reason for that is that in the final condition, there's going to be a center turning lane, which is required to facilitate people entering or leaving the station. And that actually means that we can't get the full width in there, and some parking spots get lost. And then this is, of course, now the southern section of the project site. So I'm going to start with First Avenue. I erroneously gave the council the information of 42 parking spots lost. The actual number today is 31 spots, which I understand is not ideal, and I'll talk about that in a second. But 42 was a mistake on my behalf. My designer just took a Google map, measured and divided by 20, and it's a little more complicated than that because there's driveways and there's other impediments today that mean that not everything is as simple as that. And so the spots that get lost at First Avenue are all on the northern end of the project site. So this bulb out is the cul-de-sac that's there now. Melody Toyota is on the upper left hand where I'm pointing the laser. So these 6 spots that get lost is because there's no longer a street there. So previously First Avenue flowed into San Mateo. However, the bulk of the spots that are projected to be lost under the current plan is because of the ramp and staircase that are located here. And I'll go into that in a second. And then just to follow up with the rest of it, so that equals a total of 31 spots on First Avenue lost. In addition to that, there are 11 spots on San Mateo, up by Keynes and San Mateo up on the left of your drawing. And then a net of 11 spots on, 16 spots on Huntington. So there's some additional parking provided up by, on the east side. However, that's offset by some losses here because Keynes now turns, whereas previously Huntington flowed into San Mateo. So now I'd like to just talk about some of the things we've worked with the city on. Some of what you're going to see here is a little preliminary, so I'll describe that as we go through. So what we did is we sat down with the city and looked at all the locations in which parking would be less than what's there today and tried to see what of any of those spots could be recovered. And then we looked at different alternatives, in particular for First Avenue, to see how many spots we could recoup in that area. And finally, we looked at just different options for the remainder of the project site, in particular San Mateo and Huntington. And I should note that we are continuing to work with the designer to see if there are any other individual spots that we can gain back. We're never going to get the same bang for our buck as we see in these 2 options. However, if we are able to just squeeze things up and gain an extra spot or 2, that's what we're going to do as the design progresses. So I'm going to start with San Mateo Avenue. So once again, this is the area up by where the transit center drop-off area is going to be, where the lumberyard is. So in the current condition, this exists, but this is a solid curb line. So we recognize that by dropping back that curb to match this one, we were able to gain 7 spots from what we have. So these numbers you're going to see in green, when I say 7 additional, that's 7 from the last figure I showed you. It still equals a net loss of 3 parking spots on San Mateo. We were previously showing 10, now 3, so that's where the 7 come from. And then First Avenue, we looked at 2 alternatives. And to make this work, there's still some discussion that has to happen between JPB and the city regarding what kind of licensing agreement that would happen, because the property line is this dashed line you see over there. So that's some discussion that would still have to happen to make this work. But from a purely engineering point of view, what we looked at is how can we mitigate the loss of 31 spots all on this one street. So what we came up with as a first alternative was if we simply extended the amount of parallel parking, and we just took it all the way out, we can gain back 18 spots. So that still means a net loss of 13 in that area. However, obviously 13 better than 31. At this point, I'm just going to give you a very quick description of why we were showing this many loss and why we're able to, at this late hour, gain some of them back. When we first designed this project and started talking with the city back in 2000, well, way back in 2005, but then again, as we resurrected it in 2009, one of the big unknowns was how many tracks we were going to build. And so the whole project, as you recall, was staged to allow for 4 tracks or 2 tracks, depending on where high speed was going to be at that point. So throughout the right-of-way, we were able to maintain a 2 or a 4-track alignment and preserve the parking. Only at this very northern end was there a problem. And the problem is that we could not fit 4 tracks, a staircase, a doubling back ramp, a sidewalk, and parking. So at that point, we ended up losing these spaces, and that's how we got to 31. Things are, of course, a little bit different than they were a few years ago, and so we're looking at less likelihood that we're looking at 4 tracks anytime soon than we were back in 2009, if that makes any sense. So this would allow us, if we could take off the table, even temporarily, the idea of 4 tracks, it does free up some space over here and allows us to do this extended parking. So then we took it one step further and said, well, if we're already pushing that curb line back, what else could we do? So we looked at the possibility of, instead of just doing parallel spots, if we actually angled these back, a little different, but it does free up even more parking. So now we're looking at 37 additional spots. If you recall, there were actually a loss of 31, so it's a net gain actually in this alignment of 6 spots. So we're still working with the designer on the specifics of how that would look in terms of sidewalks, tie-ins, and things like that. But just big picture, it does appear that we could add 37 spots from where we are today for a net gain of 6 if we did this. So just a summary total of what is proposed to be reduced in the after condition and what we're proposing to mitigate. So this first column, this proposed loss, that's if we did nothing different than what's in the contract plans today. So what that tells you is oh, I'm sorry, except for the parallel parking at First Avenue. It's assuming that that happens regardless. So obviously if that doesn't, you're back to 31. But assuming that we're able to make that work, that's 13 spots lost at First, 14 at San Mateo, 16 at Huntington, for a total of 43 spots lost. The proposed column, the last column on your right, represents if we were able to do some of this other stuff we were talking about. So the 6 added assumes that we're able to do these angled spots. In addition, something we haven't talked about, but something we're discussing with city staff is the city has shown some interest in leasing or in some way having possession of the existing Caltrain temporary station. So at the end of the job, we're no longer going to be using that station. All the Caltrain passengers shift to the new station, and the city has had some interest in that as either overflow for Lionsgate or maybe just to mitigate parking losses in the community. So if you add that, depending on the configuration, you can go anywhere from 70 to 90 spots on the west side of the tracks, which gives you a net gain of about anywhere from 46 to 66 spots. And I can take any questions you might have at this time.
Any questions? Irene?
I don't have a question, but I do appreciate you taking our comments from last time and working so hard to find ways to gain parking instead of losing so many that we saw. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken?
I'm just trying to get a handle on what's lost and what was existing.
Right.
Before any construction,
Right.
there was a curb line along the right-of-way.
Correct.
And uninterrupted, I don't know if we have an idea or accurate count of how many could possibly park along there. It wasn't marked off or anything. It was just available parking.
Yeah, so good. You're talking about First Avenue in particular?
First Avenue.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction you just made there. The after condition will have striped T-style parking spots. The before did not. In my comparison, my designer looked at a standard parking spot. It is quite possible that more stuff was getting crammed in depending how people were parking. But these numbers that we came up with, these adds and subtracts, these net losses, were done exactly by doing that kind of calculation. We actually took what's there before
It's
we
based
touched.
on lineal feet.
It's lineal feet, exactly.
And do we have any documentation or any idea of what the parking demand was prior? I mean, I don't recall that, my experiences in driving down First Avenue or driving through the Bel Air, that during the day, there was never any solid parking
Right.
along there. I mean,
Right.
I'm sure there was parking at night,
Right.
cars parked at night, but because there's no train station, we're introducing additional parking for train passengers now, which
Right.
is going to conflict whether or not we have sufficient parking or not. It's going to conflict with the residents.
Right.
So,
So I did not do a parking study per se on First Avenue. I can tell you anecdotally, because I worked there quite a bit with the box culvert and then obviously the follow-on contract. You are absolutely correct that the parking in the evening is at a huge premium. What I've anecdotally noticed, and take that for what it is, standard disclaimers apply, but basically the east side seems to be at capacity. The west side, where we were doing some work earlier, it tends to be a lot easier to find spots there. People don't tend to want to park on the west side of First Avenue as much. That being said, a lot of the residents on First Avenue are either rentals or for whatever reason, they have a lot of vehicles there. When we did the box culvert, how we worked around that is we would literally, in the morning, go remind people, knock on the door and say, oh, by the way, remember there's a parking restriction between this time and that time. But we did not have major issues with that, but as you correctly point out, we're changing the pattern of it by introducing a Caltrain station where one doesn't exist today.
my last comment is, I don't particularly like the diagonal parking.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just continue with parallel parking on the west side of First Avenue,
Right.
I mean, what sort of numbers do you get there?
So you're talking about this alternative right here?
Right.
Yeah, so you end up with a net loss of 13 spaces from what's there today. And where those are, you lose 7 of them actually in a part of the street that doesn't exist anymore because
Right.
that was Melody. You also lose a further 5 at a new pedestrian walk because you can't have a car parked right up against a crosswalk just for sight distance. And then the last of the parking loss is because of this turnaround. So there is some loss. However, primarily, of course, the parking demand is up against the residences. The Melody Toyota portion, we worked with Melody very early on in the contract. We found out what their need was, which was to stage a vehicle there. We provided a drop-off zone for that. There really wasn't a lot of parking demand up by Melody itself.
No, I think our concern is, what are the residents along First Avenue going to experience as far as loss of,
Right.
what they're used to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And by and large, these figures all focus on this extreme northern end of it. Everything from there south is unchanged. So that if there's a parking spot there today, there'll be a parking spot in the after condition. We just focused on the north end because that's where the big losses were. So I don't want to give the impression that we were removing parking from the whole First Avenue. We actually weren't.
And so,
touching most of it.
if I could, my last comment, those parking spaces close to Melody, close to that dead end,
Yeah.
are going to be a premium for train riders.
Yes.
In your opinion, because of the staircases, the ramps? Okay.
That is probably
So-
a true statement. Obviously, Caltrain charges to park, and the city, as I understand it, does not for street parking. So I agree with you.
Okay.
There is a ramp, as we discussed. This is an access to the station.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're parked right here, you are actually in one of the better spots.
Yeah,
I mean, not that we would advocate that, but I agree with you. I mean, that is a concern.
okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for the JPP? Thank you very much. Keep us posted. Mr. Rico?
Robert Rico, 7th Avenue. Just 2 questions, or a question and a comment. I would be leaning towards requesting that you consider putting in perpendicular parking along there for additional spots. And the other comment more, using the current Caltrain parking as additional replacement spots or whatever doesn't really tie in to this end. I mean, people are not going to park down opposite Lions Field or whatever and walk to their homes or whatever. So yes, it would be nice for the city to maybe be able to use that for things in the Lions Field area, but to say that those 40 or 50 or more spaces are substituting for some of the loss because of the construction up between Pine and San Bruno Avenue, I think is not the right conclusion to draw. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Item 10B, approve a response to the grand jury report, which is the San Mateo County Special Districts, who is really in charge of the taxpayers' money, the Mosquito District embezzlement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. As you know, the grand jury from time to time identifies topics and issues that they take under investigation, and they render findings and conclusions that they will disseminate to responsible agencies throughout our county for a required response. That is the case in this situation where the grand jury has taken up an investigation of the situation primarily prompted by the 2011 discovered embezzlement at the Mosquito and Vector Control District for San Mateo County. As a result, the grand jury has rendered a report with a variety of findings and recommendations. Some of those recommendations directed to cities within the county. As is the requirement of the court, the city, if required to respond, is required to respond to all of the findings and to those recommendations that are directed to its attention, in this case to cities' attention generally. In some cases, the types of issues that the that the grand jury takes up may be of limited interest when they relate to issues within the county, but not those specifically and directly and immediately related to the city of San Bruno. They may be of sort of a limited or a tangential type of interest to the San Bruno City Council and to the San Bruno community. I think in this particular case, we have a little bit of a different situation in that this topic, largely because of the diligent effort of Mr. Robert Recall, the city's appointed representative to the Mosquito and Vector Control District Board, does carry a little bit more interest. You receive regular reports from Mr. Recall. He has frequently, as needed, brought members of the district staff to discuss current issues with the City Council. And both the district and Mr. Recall provide regular reports, both in writing as well as in other venues other than directly in front of the City Council. For example, information that is provided over our San Bruno Cable Channel 1 and information that is provided to the public via our Focus newsletter. So I would say that this particular topic has a little bit more sort of interest for our community and our organization, largely because of what I would again refer to as the diligent effort of your appointed representative. As such, both Mr. Reichel and Recall, and I'm sorry, I'm trying, and Mr. Gay, the district manager, both took the time to meet with me and to provide me both their opinions, but more importantly, background information that assisted in staff's preparation of this proposed response to the grand jury. So what you have in front of you tonight is both a cover letter as well as a detailed response to each of the findings in the grand jury's report and the two recommendations that are directed to the attention of cities in our county. I'll summarize just very briefly in a very high-level overview the content of that proposed response. In short summary, staff is recommending that the city's response agree, for the most part, with the findings of the grand jury, with a couple of specific exceptions. And I'll come back to those in a moment. And that the City Council identify that the two recommendations to which you are required to respond as to your adoption of those recommendations, your actual action to implement them, that in fact the city has either already implemented the recommendation or is prepared, or staff is recommending that you be prepared via this response to implement the other recommendation should there be a situation in the future where that is called for. So I'll come back to that in just a second. As for the findings in this grand jury report, many of them, as I indicated before, relate directly and specifically to issues that arise out of the very, very unfortunate and obviously very concerning situation where hundreds of thousands of dollars were embezzled from the district in a situation that was uncovered in 2011. The grand jury, of course, addresses itself to many of the specifics of the issues that led up to the embezzlement situation, as well as activities and issues that have occurred since that time in the district's response. In general, staff recommends that you, wise, I guess I would say, that you agree with the basic findings that embezzlement happened. It resulted from a variety of deficiencies in the internal controls, reporting, and other issues within the district. And that situation really can't be ignored, and it is one of, should be one of extreme concern both to this community as well as to all others in our county. At the same time, the grand jury has, in its report, stepped a bit beyond those findings as it does and concluded that there is a imperative or proposed reconsideration of dissolution of the district and transfer of the functions of the district to the County Environmental Health Department as a proposed solution, if you will, to the situation that, that previously occurred. Staff is recommending that your response take a little bit of a different position. And again, I'll say one more time, based largely on our specific experience with the district, with its services, the quality of those services, the level of time and attention that have been devoted to the protection of health and the effectiveness of those services within our county. And then very specifically, much of this recommendation is based on the similarly good service that this community receives from its appointed representative, who takes very seriously his responsibility both to be accountable for any lack of attention that might have contributed to the embezzlement situation, but also very importantly to his responsibilities as an appointed representative to a district that provides an important service within our county. And as such, staff is recommending that your response to the grand jury does not agree 100%, but agrees in part with many of the with many of the findings that the grand jury has made as to specifics related to the embezzlement and to the current situation of the district, and that your response disagree with the findings that suggest the dissolution of the district and the transfer of its responsibilities to the county. The primary reason for that recommendation that you're receiving tonight is beyond the comments that I've repeated several times already about the good service that staff recommends that this community has received. That In fact, there is no information in the grand jury report that addresses itself specifically to how or why you and this community should expect that better service, better attention, better use of the taxpayers' money might result from transfer and absorption of the district's current responsibilities into an already busy department of the county government. Staff is not recommending to you that that wouldn't be a good situation or a potentially workable situation. Staff is recommending that after review of this information, our conclusion is that such dramatic or drastic change in the district's operation may not, and staff recommends, is not warranted to address the current situation, primarily because staff's review demonstrates that, in fact, the district, having undergone a startlingly difficult and problematic situation, has taken the necessary actions that one would reasonably expect the district to take in addressing the improvements that are necessary in heightening its vigilance. And I think, as Mr. Gay said to me when I met with him, that this district is probably, at this current time, unfortunately not previously, but at the current time, among the most unlikely places that a similar fraud or embezzlement might occur in the future. That by itself is not compelling, but I think, again, that the grand jury report does very little to substantiate that beyond a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to dissolution of the district and transfer of its responsibilities, that the status of mosquito and vector control services would in fact be substantially improved by taking that action. Again, I will simply close by saying that, as I have already said, that I think much longer ago in the past, it was this city's experience, like it is many cities' experience, I would imagine currently, that there's not a outpouring of interest within the community to serve on the Mosquito District Board as your appointed representative. I continue to believe, and I believe it's the City Council's opinion, that we are indeed very fortunate that Mr. Recall has stepped forward, that he has served diligently, and frankly that he has accepted the responsibility that arguably is partly his for the situation that the Mosquito District experienced. Again, I think that the city is well served and that it has demonstrated, and that the district has demonstrated its accountability, its responsibility, and I think that we can enthusiastically say that your responsibilities are well carried out, your City Council's responsibilities in safeguarding the interests of San Bruno residents and those throughout our county in this functional area are in fact being well served by your time and attention to the appointment process, your assurance that you are represented on this board and that your representative is performing his functions in a responsible, thoughtful manner. So with that, you have in front of you tonight a detailed response to the grand jury. You're free, as always, to modify the draft information that's in front of you in any way that suits your interests. Your response, however, is due to the county by October 16th. So we do have a deadline that is coming up. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions of the city manager? Ken?
I don't have any questions. I guess the question would be if Mr. Recall had any, comments as to, information that would we'd need to adjust or comment on, within. I just want to say that I agree totally with the response of the city. It seems a long time ago that I was appointed as the representative with the doom and gloom of West Nile virus coming upon us, and I got to know Mr. Gay. First and foremost, he is a true professional as far as vector control and the whole knowledge of this whole district. Unfortunately, he didn't anticipate that there'd be criminals, within his administration. So I don't agree at all as far as this whole reaction. And you say knee-jerk. I think they want to, the county or something wants to find a culprit, and give them a chance to get all this money so that they can hopefully do as good a job. But my concern is that we are lucky, or not lucky, but we are fortunate to have a very good volunteer representative that keeps us in tune with what's going on, which is the most important part of the service, is the health and welfare of the community as it relates to mosquitoes and other critters. It's not about administration. I mean, are we supposed to always consider that anyone that takes on an administrative position in any organization is a potential criminal? So I think as long as those measures have been changed, as long as they are within better financial reporting practice, and as long as the board agrees on that and Mr. Gay is aware of what changes have to be done, I think the issue should be moot, and we should get on to the business of protecting the environment and protecting the communities. Thank you, Uncle Bob.
Thank you. Anyone else from the council?
Through the chair.
Michael?
I don't think I agree as wholeheartedly with what's in this report. I felt that the tone was a little too dismissive of the seriousness of what was reported. The grand jury didn't actually require our reaction or comments or an action on a lot of the things that were noted in the report. And I do agree with the fact that we have excellent representation in Mr. Riegel, but I was left with the feeling that San Bruno may be in the minority in terms of having adequate representation on the Board of Trustees. There are cities that don't have a representative. As the city manager mentioned, it's difficult to get people that are going to take the job seriously, and I don't know that anyone takes the job as seriously and as professionally as Mr. Riegel does. But I was left with the feeling that that is not, that we may be the exception and not the rule. There was a number of things that were noted in the report that made me feel that, perhaps all the issues have, although a lot of the financial problems that were identified, I believe 5 of the 8 that were identified by the consultant had been dealt with. One of the recommendations was that, there were several things that to me seemed more just bad judgment from somebody that, from the director, somebody that was put in that position. There was a comment there from the consultants that said that the director had program skills but lacked the fiscal skills necessary for overseeing financial operations, which is a big part of that job. Again, none of that was really addressed in the report. It's not something we were asked to comment on, but I would hate to really close the book on this whole thing and just say, yes, we're going to move on as is, without really doing anything to at least address my concerns about the people that are being put into these positions. I don't really understand how that director is appointed. There was something else that said that the district's policies were amended, and now it requires 90% of the trustees to remove the director, which to me seems uncommon and probably an unnecessarily high burden to have somebody removed from office. So that to me was a concern. Again, it wasn't addressed in our response, but these are things that I would like to see addressed before we say, okay, we're going to move on and we're going to close the book on this. Those are my comments.
Anyone else? Mr. Riegel, do you have something?
Just a couple of quick comments relating to Michael Salazar's statements. I'm sure Mr. Gay or myself or any of the other top people in the district would be more than willing to sit down and give you additional feedback to some of your questions. I did have the ability to look at the draft of City Manager Jackson's response, and I don't see that I would ask that any wording be changed. I think Connie and her staff did their due diligence and put together a very good response. I do think that San Bruno is probably among the few cities that are really going to take this sort of depth in replying. I think that's just San Bruno doesn't do a superficial job. So I'm open to sitting down with anyone from the council or any city staff, or getting Mr. Gay or the finance director to additionally sit down if you have any questions. The 90%, that number for removing the director, had been in the policy and procedures that I'm currently the chairman of the committee on for a number of years. It was not something that was just put in. At least one trustee agrees with you that they think that may be too high. It has not been brought back to the full board yet to propose a number other than the 90%.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Through the chair, real quick, the 90% threshold is something that I also would agree is worth looking into. I think that is a high threshold to remove any director that serves. Also, just better secondary reviews when it comes to the accounting aspect, which is already addressed somewhat in the report, I think would help. And I'm not at this time in favor of having or recommending that the program be issued over to the county. In my opinion, I think for what the district is doing and what the actions speak louder than words, and obviously, as Councilman Ibarra said, there was this imminent threat. There was what was going to occur, and they have done a good due diligence. Unfortunately, there are some people that obviously gave it a black eye, and so I think that's healing, and I think that some of the comments that were made can be looked into a little bit on this, and those are my thoughts.
Okay. Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. First of all, one of the key recommendations of the two recommendations that are directed to cities is that if the City Council is not able to locate a suitable representative to the Mosquito District Board, that the City Council it's recommended by the grand jury that the City Council would appoint one of themselves. And the draft material is in front of you. View that as a key initiative and a very good and strong recommendation with which staff is recommending that you agree. And in fact, you have a representative. He's been willing to serve. Presumably, he's willing to continue to serve. But should he not be available, you could. I don't want to suggest that this city couldn't be in the same situation that others are. It's not a plum job in many respects as volunteer assignments go. So it may be something that we could emphasize in the response. And just a quick response to Councilmember Salazar's comments. Honestly, we sort of get into the mode of responding to the things that we're required to respond to, and that so the grand jury has a very specific. You have to respond to this, but I think your suggestion might be that we could take a step further, and to say in the cover letter, for example, that we believe that these. What I noted down was a couple of issues that you identified. One, concerned about the 90% removal or the 90% vote requirement for removal of the manager, and secondly, maybe a strengthening of the program for what is the qualifications for the general manager, and how is a person for that position sought and evaluated. That is, I don't think the grand jury would mind if you gave them some additional suggestions. We would be happy to include that in the letter.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? We're asking for approval of the response to the grand jury report, most likely with the suggestions of the city manager. Someone like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion with those changes, suggestions.
I'll second.
Motion is second on the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Item 10C, adopt a resolution supporting an application to the San Mateo County Transportation Authority for the Measure A grade separation program for the planning and project study report update of the Scott Street grade separation project.
Honorable Mayor, council members, good evening. Tonight, I will present to you our request for support for the grant application for the grade separation project for Scott. Our city has had 4 rail crossing at Angus, San Mateo, San Bruno, and Scott. After major accidents back in 2000, a study was developed to separate the rail traffic from all of the other access modes. At that time, the study was undertaken for all of those 4 rail crossings, including one from South San Francisco, the South Linden crossing, which was included in the same study due to the close proximity of the Scott crossing and assuming interference or influence of the solution for those crossings. After the development of that study back in 2005, due to funding limitation and based on safety or accident history, this project was limited to only 3 grade separation crossings for Angus, San Mateo, and San Bruno. And as you know very well, that project is underway, and hopefully by the end of this year or early next year will be finalized. Back in 2005, when the voters approved the extension of the health cent sales tax Measure A fund until 2033, was included a special provision in that extension that about 15% of the funding to be allocated for grade separating throughout grade separating the rail crossing throughout all of the communities. This program has over 200 million right now. Back in last month, actually, San Mateo County Transit Authority, who is administering this program, came out for a call for projects. This time is their intent to allocate between $5 or $9 million of this available funds. South San Francisco is very interested to apply and to consider grade separating South Linden crossing based on their safety concern and with the intent to improve safety and crossing time, frankly, at that location, was interested to apply for this grant opportunity. Based on the discussion between the 2 entities, was considered as a good opportunity to apply jointly. Then both agencies are at the table to discuss all of the possible alternatives for grade separating both crossings. That's the reason why the city jointly with South City applied for these grant opportunities. these grants will be addressed in the next 1 or 2 months, and is the intent of San Mateo County Transit Authority to propose grant award in November to that board. If you have any question, I would be happy to respond.
Any questions of staff? Ken?
Clara, we spoke about this earlier, and one thing is, through the last 10 years, there was talk about Scott, and I believe the mayor can also comment, one of the conditions of the grade separation that's under construction now was that eventually they would close Scott. So is that not an issue right now that is now transferred over to a study between Scott and South Linden?
Councilmember, you are correct. Was included in the environmental document for this grade separation project that Scott will be close to vehicular traffic and will be open only just for pedestrian traffic. Is included in our agreement with JPB was the scope of the project. The scope of our existing project is defined as vehicular crossing at these 3 locations and pedestrian crossing at 3 other locations, including some new. Certainly, this is included as the scope of the project, depending on the since those studies were developed back before 2005 or during that time, the assumptions were different. Now, the assumptions with the high-speed rail is changing. You have now, everybody's talking only just about the blended alternative for the high speed, which certainly is not requiring 4 lanes, will require probably only just so-called passing lanes or tracks, which would add in certain location 1 more possible track. Based on the available study, this area is one of the possibilities, but certainly is not the most efficient one. Those alternatives and discussion are on the table, and it's a good timing to update that study and then to see what are the realistic possible alternative, and then jointly with South City and us at the table to see if any other reasonable, feasible alternative.
So is it safe to say that JPB will not be showing up within now and within, say, the next 6 months and say, we need to talk about Scott Street?
They were notified many times before that the city, or during our prior discussion, including through a letter of interest, that the city is still interested in keeping up the discussion and to see alternative about Scott. They will not be surprised.
But no closure?
The city didn't say that we'll be opposed to it, but then expressed the interest to see if any other feasible, reasonable alternative will be available.
My concern, and you can talk to the city manager, but we're nearing the end of this project, and then we still get a few curveballs along the way, whether it's parking, whether it's whatever. And I'm just afraid, and I don't know if we should be talking out loud like this, but is there still an opportunity for the JPB to come and say, we're going to make good on what was decided, the condition to close Scott Street? Yeah. Or is that off the table now because we're involved in a study?
all of the improvement possible at Scott were included in this project. And as part of this project, certain physical improvements were necessary at that intersection to be implemented to make it safe to operate at this existing condition. Then, in order for us to create the assumption of closing Scott and keeping it open for pedestrian only, another project, another investment would need to happen from JPB or TA or some other investment or follow-up project will need to follow this project. Then this could be the first phase for whatever will happen later on. But the discussion will happen in the same time, what is feasible on South Linden, then how or what is the best solution for Scott. Certainly they are aware, and the city expressed our lack of interest, and you expressed here many times to JPB that the city is not interested right now and is not anxious to have any other great separation project or a follow-up project. Our residents suffered enough through these last few years. But I think this is an opportunity to make sure that even if it will not happen in a short time frame, still will be the best solution for the city contemplated at that location.
Okay, anyone else? Someone like to introduce the resolution for adoption?
I'll introduce the resolution.
Councilmember Salazar.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Rivera.
Aye.
Mayor Ruane.
Aye. Item 11, report of commissions, boards, and committees. There are none this evening. Item 12, comments from council members. Anyone? Item 13, closed session. We have 4 closed sessions, actually. 2 on the main agenda and 2 on the special meeting agenda. The first one is a conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8. Property is 324 Florida Avenue, San Bruno. Agency negotiators, the city manager, and negotiating parties, City of San Bruno and the Clayton family, under negotiation, price, and terms of payment. Second item B, conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8. The property is 105 Cabrillo Way, San Bruno. Agency negotiators, the city manager, negotiating parties, City of San Bruno, and under negotiation, price and terms of payment. The third closed session is a conference with real property negotiators pursuant to Government Code Section 9456.8. Property is 1690 Claremont Drive, San Bruno. Agency negotiators, city manager, negotiating party, City of San Bruno, and the Bullis family, under negotiation, price and terms of payment. And the last one is a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D for one case. And this meeting is adjourned until October 8th, October already, 2013, right here at the Senior Center.